Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Bloom, Group Publisher of Roofing Contractor, and welcome to our Best of Success podcast show. It's always an honor to have with me Trent Cotney, partner of Adams and Reese. Trent, thank you so much for joining me.
Joe, it's great to see you again.
Well, there's always a lot of hot topics to talk about when it comes to legal issues, Trent, so we're always grateful for the time that you share with us to let all the contractors listening know what's going on. It sounds like there's some updates and some things that have changed and happened with the non-compete that we've talked about a few times. What's the update? What does everybody need to know?
Yeah, so back in April, the FTC came out with a ban on non-competes, pretty much eliminated all non-competes. There was an exception if you were, an executive highly compensated and have decision-making capability, policy-making capability. But recently, and right before the 4th of July holiday, a district court in Texas, Judge Ada Brown, issued a temporary injunction. And for those of you that don't know, injunction basically it means that you're prevented from doing something. Okay. And in order to be able to show that, you have to produce enough evidence, enough argument to show that you could potentially be successful on the merits. Okay. So when you're applying for an injunction, you first get a temporary injunction, then you have a full-blown, almost mini trial, and then a permanent injunction is granted if you are successful. So what's interesting is the court granted this temporary injunction, which means the judge found enough to suggest that the arguments that were made could potentially be successful in obtaining that permanent injunction. Now, the ban, as it stands now, goes into effect September 1st.
Right.
And the judge has said that she will hear the hearing on the permanent injunction prior to August 30th so that a decision can be made. Where does it stand right now? Well, this decision only affects the plaintiff that was in this case, which was like a tax consumer group or something like that that was joined by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And it only affects it in that district. So the ban
Hmm.
is still in place. And it's important to note that this isn't the only legal challenge out there. I do anticipate that there are some constitutional issues here where you've got a executive agency trying to regulate interstate commerce. Okay, so this is really the purview of Congress, not,
Right.
executive agency action. So I do think there are some constitutional arguments that may suggest that this is overturned. If for some reason it goes forward, what do employers need to do? Well, there are different ways that you can still ensure that your employees don't necessarily unfairly compete against you. We're all for fair competition, and but when you have somebody that you've specially trained and you've given access to information, you want to be able to kind of secure that. So things like non-solicitation, where you can't solicit past employees or customers, is still largely in effect, right? Confidentiality, you can always protect confidential information or proprietary information that you might have. And there are other things that you can potentially do. One of the things I've talked to some roofing contractors and, other, walls and ceilings contractors about is the ability to maybe recapture training cost, right? Or maybe a signing bonus that if you leave after a certain amount of time, you have to pay it back. So there are disincentives that can be placed in the event that you're trying to, make sure that an employee stays for the same amount of time. As I kind of mentioned before, the best way to ensure that your employees don't compete against you is to keep them happy, right?
Sure. Boy,
But we live in a world right now where regardless of what trade you're in, lack of skilled labor is the biggest issue. So it's a zero-sum game. Everybody's trying to get everybody else's workers all the time. So, you need to at least contemplate some things like this, have them in place, and recognize that even if this goes through, which is a big if, there's
hmm.
still a lot of different ways that you can cut against it.
Yeah. So interesting. It is definitely an ongoing topic that we'll be speaking more on. Now, when that judge took a look at that injunction, do you think that there was something specific that she saw that she felt like, was there a specific piece of it that she just didn't like? I don't know if that information was given out or if it was just the whole thing in general. She's like, nope,
Yes.
okay, we're good.
So I had an opportunity to kind of look at some of the arguments that were made, and a lot of them were constitutional based arguments, right? The ability, the freedom to contract, the freedom to negotiate, the freedom, interstate commerce, all these different things where there's basic fundamental rights in business and commerce that shouldn't be affected, right? So historically, states have been free to restrict non-competes. And states like California, for example, ban non-competes. There's not an issue with that, right? You could put restrictions on it, you can ban it, you can do whatever you want from a state perspective. But once you start having an executive agency, interfere with what normally would either be Congress on a federal level or state action, there's some jurisdictional issues there, right? There's some questions
Yeah.
about whether or not the executive agency has the ability to do that. So my guess is that if this thing were to play out, and if the ban was found unconstitutional, it's going to be on that basis that the FTC simply doesn't have the power or the authority to issue this type of ruling. So
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see. I mean, crazy things happen when you put it in front of a judge or a jury. So don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but where I'm sitting, I can see some potential issues with regard to enforcement.
Got it. Okay. Well, great insight. The other thing we were talking about before we got on, Trent, was fireproofing, which is a
Right.
really big deal. It's changed a lot, in the last 20 years for sure, right? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. I had
and
the pleasure of speaking at the fireproofing, conference earlier in the year, and fireproofing itself is a very technical art, right? I mean, it requires not only knowledge of building code, but of fire codes, energy codes, everything else. It is a very technical trade.
100%.
And one of the things that I've seen with fireproofing is, especially if you're working on like a low slope roof or you're working on anything inside of a building, you could potentially have some of that fireproofing or insulation shake out, fall down, and we're always getting personal injury type claims where somebody's in a Walmart or a grocery store and has something hit them, and say, no, my head hurts, and you got to deal with that kind of stuff. So what I advise contractors to do is there's a couple of ways to kind of safeguard that, right? If you're going to work where there's existing fire stopping or insulation, you want to make sure that there's netting or something that's going to be there to catch anything that might fall down. The other thing that you want to do is address it contractually. You want to make sure there's a disclaimer in there that everyone understands that this is a possibility and that the owner or the tenant is taking precautions to kind of deal with that. So it's a two-step process. One, operationally, try to put some things in place to catch that stuff so that it doesn't fall to the ground, doesn't hit somebody, doesn't, create any kind of debris. And the second thing is look at it contractually to see what you can do there.
Awesome. Well, again, Trent, very good insight. If anybody has any questions, where do they find you? How do they find out more?
Sure, they can hit me up on social at Trent Cotney, or feel free to email me at trent.cotney@arlaw.com.
Sounds fabulous. And if anybody has any questions for us, it is roofingcontractor.com or wconline.com. And while you're there, make sure you sign up for all our free content, especially follow us on all our social media channels so you can stay up to date on all the great nuggets of information we get from Trent legally. But most importantly, stay safe and healthy. And we can't wait to talk to you soon. Thanks again, Trent.
Thank you.